They don't always love loudly. Sometimes the deepest love is the one that learns how to stay. They say love is loud, full of fireworks, passion, and big emotional confessions, but real love is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. It is the kind of love that does not make noise but still stays. The kind that feels like calm after chaos, like silence that feels safe instead of empty. And when someone with an avoidant way of loving cares about you, that silence can carry more meaning than words ever could. It is not distance, it is not lack of feeling, it is a different form of devotion. For someone with avoidant patterns, love is not built through dramatic moments or constant reassurance. It does not grow through big emotional displays. Instead, it forms slowly, almost invisibly, through a sense of safety that develops over time. These are people who learned early that depending on others can lead to pain, pressure, or emotional loss of control. So they became self-reliant, not because they do not feel, but because feeling too much once felt unsafe. For them, love is not about intensity, it is about security. They are not pulled in by overwhelming emotion, but by something far more rare for them, emotional calm without pressure. When they can feel without being pushed, judged, or overwhelmed, something inside them begins to soften. That is where real attachment starts to grow. Emotional safety becomes the foundation of their connection. Without it, they stay guarded. With it, they slowly open. But this opening is never sudden. It is quiet, gradual, and often easy to miss if you are only looking for obvious signs of love. Many avoidant people grew up linking closeness with discomfort. Maybe closeness meant criticism, emotional demands, or a loss of personal space. So over time, they built invisible walls. These walls are not there because they do not care. They are there because they learned to protect themselves. So when they meet someone who does not try to force their way through those walls, something different happens. When they meet someone who respects their timing, their space, and their emotional rhythm, they start to feel something unfamiliar, peace within connection. And that feeling is what slowly changes everything. Instead of feeling trapped, they start to feel safe. Instead of wanting to run, they start to stay a little longer. They begin to include you in their world in small, careful ways, not because they are being pushed, but because they no longer feel the need to keep everything locked away. This is not about chasing them or trying to convince them to stay close. In fact, pressure has the opposite effect. What helps is creating an environment where their defenses are no longer necessary. For someone with avoidant patterns, safety is built through consistency, not intensity. They pay attention to patterns more than promises. They notice how you behave when things are calm, and especially how you react when things are not. Do you respect their silence? Do you stay steady when they pull back? Do you remain emotionally balanced instead of reacting with fear or frustration? These moments matter more than big emotional speeches, because in those moments, they start to learn something new. That love does not always mean chaos. That closeness does not always lead to pressure. That connection can exist without losing themselves inside it. That realization does not come loudly. It comes quietly over time. But once it lands, it begins to heal something deep inside them. Slowly, they start to lower their guard. They begin to share small parts of their day. They reach out more naturally. They become less rigid, less guarded, more present in subtle ways. To others, these may look like small things. A message in the morning, a simple check-in, a brief moment of honesty. But for them, these are not small at all. These are signs of trust, signs that they feel safe enough to let you see a bit more of them. And for someone with avoidant patterns, safety is the closest thing to love. This kind of commitment does not always look like traditional romance. It is not filled with constant affection or verbal reassurance. Instead, it is shown through consistency and presence. When they choose to stay emotionally open, even when their instincts tell them to pull away, that is where their real commitment lives. It is not an easy choice for them. It goes against what they have learned for years. But when they decide you are worth that risk, it becomes something deeply rooted. Their version of forever is not built on words, it is built on presence, on showing up, on staying even when silence feels easier. When they let you in, they are not just sharing time with you. They are slowly undoing years of emotional self-protection. That is why their love often feels quiet, but very real. It is not performed. It is lived. They value calm over drama, understanding over control, stability over emotional highs and lows. Their love does not try to overwhelm, it tries to feel safe. In this kind of connection, commitment is not a declaration, it is a shift from fear into trust, from distance into closeness, from solitude into shared emotional space. And through emotional safety, they find the courage to stay. There is also a moment when something very important begins to change. Instead of needing distance, they start to want presence. This is not something that happens quickly. Avoidant patterns are deeply rooted. At first, there is often a push and pull, a desire for closeness followed by a sudden need to withdraw. This internal conflict is normal for them. One part of them wants connection, while another part fears losing control inside it. What helps soften this conflict is being with someone who does not force them to choose between closeness and freedom. When they realize they can be near you without feeling trapped, something begins to relax inside them. Your presence stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like comfort. They begin to understand that closeness does not automatically mean loss of independence. It can also mean shared calm. For someone who has spent years associating distance with safety, learning to enjoy presence is a major emotional shift. At first, it may show in very small ways, sitting closer without pulling away, staying in conversation a little longer, remaining in silence without discomfort, not rushing to escape emotional moments. These are quiet signs that their nervous system is starting to trust connection. Where there was once tension, there is now ease. Where there was avoidance, there is now curiosity. You start to feel less like something to escape from and more like a place of emotional rest. This change is not random. Avoidant individuals are very sensitive to emotional pressure. So when they begin to seek your presence instead of avoiding it, it means something important has shifted inside them. You are no longer registered as a threat to their independence. Instead, you are becoming a source of stability. They may begin to stay longer without needing a reason. They may reach out more naturally. They may share thoughts they would normally keep inside or sit with you in silence without feeling the need to pull away. To an outside observer, these may seem ordinary, but for them, these are meaningful emotional steps. They show that the urge to disconnect is losing its control. This stage is where something beautiful happens. They begin to build safety not in being alone, but in being with someone. Their walls do not collapse suddenly. They fade slowly through trust, built in steady, calm connection. And when an avoidant starts to show their inner chaos, that is one of the deepest forms of trust they can give. Because behind their calm exterior, there is often a much more complicated inner world. A world filled with thoughts they rarely share, fears they do not easily express, emotions they have learned to manage alone. To let someone see that inner world is not easy for them. It feels exposed, it feels vulnerable, it feels like letting go of control. So when they finally begin to open up about what is happening inside them, it is not casual, it is meaningful. It is a quiet sign that they no longer see you as someone who will overwhelm them, but as someone who can hold space for their truth. Avoidant patterns are built on emotional self-protection. They learn to stay composed even when they are struggling inside. So when that control softens, it means trust has entered the connection. And in that moment, their love becomes visible, not through words, but through honesty. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, but it is real. That person slowly becomes a steady place inside their internal storm. This shift rarely happens in big moments. It starts small, almost unnoticeable at first. They might share something simple from their past, a quiet fear, or a memory they usually keep locked away. To most people, these moments seem ordinary, but for someone with avoidant patterns, they carry real weight. Each small disclosure is like loosening a wall they spent years building for protection. As they feel accepted in those vulnerable moments, something begins to change in their inner belief system. They start to realize that love does not always punish imperfection, that being seen does not automatically lead to rejection, that expressing pain does not make them weak. Slowly, they begin to understand that real connection can actually reduce the very anxiety they once tried to escape. When they open up emotionally, it is rarely smooth or organized. It often comes out in fragments. They may struggle to find the right words, pause often, or even apologize for feeling too much. But behind that hesitation is something very real, a genuine desire to be understood without having to perform or hide. This kind of vulnerability is not just emotional release, it is also connection in progress. It shows that they are no longer only protecting themselves from closeness, but starting to step into it. They are not seeking perfection anymore. What they want is understanding, not correction, but empathy. At times, revealing their inner chaos also becomes a quiet test, not in a manipulative way, but in a deeply protective one. They have lived so long with the fear of being abandoned that showing their unfiltered self becomes a way of checking emotional safety. Your response in those moments carries more meaning than it might appear on the surface. If they are met with patience instead of judgment, something powerful starts to form inside them. A new belief slowly replaces the old one, that love does not require perfection, that being flawed does not make them unlovable, that they can be emotionally honest and still be accepted. With enough of these experiences, their nervous system begins to soften in connection. Love starts to feel less like danger and more like stability. And in that stability, they begin to relax into emotional closeness instead of resisting it. Over time, their openness deepens. They may begin expressing not only fears, but also needs, which is often the hardest step for them. This is where attachment starts turning into something more grounded, because for someone who has survived by keeping everything contained, letting someone see the full emotional picture is a form of surrender. It becomes a quiet message without words. I trust you with parts of me I don't fully know how to hold myself. And in that shift, love stops being defensive and starts becoming relational. Not guarded survival, but shared emotional space. The beauty of this stage is in its simplicity. Their love does not need dramatic expressions to be real. It shows itself in honesty, in the willingness to stay open even when it feels uncomfortable, in letting someone witness the parts of them that are usually hidden away. This is not weakness, it is emotional courage, because when they allow someone into their inner storms, they are not asking to be fixed, they are asking to be present with them inside it. And when that presence is offered, something profound changes. You stop being just a partner in their life and start becoming a source of calm within it. In that shared space, love begins to feel less like tension and more like safety, less like something to survive and more like something to rest in. When someone with avoidant patterns begins to protect the relationship instead of only protecting themselves, it becomes one of the clearest signs of real emotional attachment. For most of their life, their default setting has been self-protection. Their instinct is to pull back, create distance, and avoid emotional overwhelm. Love has always been experienced as something double-sided for them. It feels warm, but also risky. It brings closeness, but also fear of loss, dependency, or emotional loss of control. So when that pattern begins to shift, even slightly, it is significant. Instead of only protecting their own emotional space, they begin to protect the connection itself. That means love is no longer something they manage from a distance. It becomes something they value enough to preserve. At first, avoidant individuals often respond to discomfort by withdrawing. Silence feels easier than conversation. Distance feels safer than emotional processing. But as attachment deepens, something subtle changes. They start staying even when things feel uncomfortable. They may still struggle to express themselves clearly, but they stop disappearing. Instead of escaping conflict, they begin trying, even in small ways, to repair it. And for someone whose automatic response used to be withdrawal, that shift is meaningful. It shows that the relationship has become more important than their old coping patterns. Protecting the bond also changes what they start paying attention to. They become more aware of emotional impact, not just personal discomfort. Before reacting, they pause. They start considering how their words or silence might affect the other person. If earlier they prioritized independence above everything else, now they begin balancing that independence with emotional awareness. Love slowly shifts from self-focused protection into shared responsibility. This growth does not happen suddenly. It develops through observation and experience. They notice patience, they notice consistency, they notice that closeness does not automatically lead to pressure or loss of self. And in response to that, they begin to mirror it back in their own way. Their emotional expression also becomes more intentional. When overwhelmed, they may still need space, but instead of disappearing, they communicate it. When conflict arises, they try to address it instead of avoiding it completely. This is not about becoming emotionally perfect. It is about choosing connection over automatic escape. At this stage, love starts to feel less like something that threatens their identity and more like something that adds meaning to it. They begin to understand that staying connected does not mean losing themselves. It means learning how to remain present without shutting down. Protecting the relationship becomes their quiet version of commitment. Even if they do not use big emotional language, their behavior begins to show consistency. They show up when it matters. They think beyond themselves. They consider the impact of their choices on the relationship as a whole. These are not loud expressions of love, but they are stable ones. This stage also reflects emotional bravery, because for someone who is used to protecting themselves above all else, choosing to protect a relationship means accepting vulnerability. It means accepting that connection comes with risk, but deciding that it is still worth it. That decision marks growth. It is the point where love is no longer just something they react to, but something they actively participate in building. They are no longer only surviving emotional closeness, they are learning how to sustain it. When an avoidant begins protecting the bond, they are no longer guarding their heart against you. They are starting to care for the connection with you. And that shift, though quiet, is deeply meaningful. It shows that love has moved from isolation toward partnership, from distance toward shared responsibility, from self-protection toward mutual presence. And in that steady, often unseen effort, their love becomes something real, consistent, and lasting. An avoidant way of loving is rarely loud. It does not rely on constant words, dramatic expressions, or visible emotional intensity. Instead, it is quiet, steady, and built on consistency over time. Because for someone with avoidant patterns, love has always carried contradiction. They want closeness, but they also fear it. They are drawn to connection, but also cautious of what it might cost them emotionally. So when they finally stay in a relationship, it is not because the fear disappears completely, but because trust slowly becomes stronger than it. Their emotional world often feels intense internally, even if it does not appear that way on the outside. They feel deeply, sometimes more than they can comfortably express. But instead of showing it through words, they show it through reliability. They may not frequently say how much they care, but they show up. They remain present in important moments. They remember details that matter to you. They adjust their life quietly around the relationship without making it a performance. This is how their love expresses itself. For them, consistency is more meaningful than emotional display. Being there over time carries more weight than saying the right thing in the moment. They build love through presence, not persuasion. One of the clearest signs of their attachment is how they start making space for you in their inner world. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gradually. Their routines begin to include you. Their thoughts begin to return to you more often. Their emotional resistance begins to soften in familiar ways. Even silence with you starts to feel different. It is no longer something they need to escape. It becomes something they can exist within comfortably. They are not trying to prove love constantly. They are maintaining it, protecting what already exists. And that quiet protection is where their real emotional depth lives. There is something important to understand about avoidant patterns that often gets missed. From the outside, it can look like distance, inconsistency, or emotional coldness. But internally, it is usually the opposite experience. There is often a strong emotional world there, just tightly controlled and carefully filtered before it is ever shown. For many avoidant individuals, emotional closeness does not feel naturally safe at first, not because they do not value connection, but because their nervous system learned early on that closeness can come with pressure, expectations, or emotional overwhelm. So they adapt by creating space between themselves and others. That space is not always a rejection of love, it is a method of staying regulated. What makes their attachment style so complex is the internal conflict they live with. One part of them genuinely wants connection, comfort, and emotional intimacy. Another part immediately reacts to that same closeness as something that could become too consuming or destabilizing. So they move in cycles, approach, then withdraw, then reassess, then slowly return again when things feel safe enough. Because of this, their trust is not built through intensity. In fact, intensity can often push them further away. What actually reaches them is emotional consistency that does not demand immediate closeness or emotional performance. When they are with someone who remains steady, patient, and emotionally grounded, their system starts to register a different possibility. That connection does not have to equal pressure. This is where the deeper shift begins. They start learning, often very slowly, that they can stay connected without losing their independence. That they can be close to someone without being emotionally consumed by it. This realization is not logical for them at first. It is felt through repeated experience. As trust builds, their way of relating begins to change in subtle ways. They might start initiating contact more often, but in small and careful steps. They may share thoughts that are more personal or emotionally honest than before. They may begin to tolerate emotional conversations that they would have previously avoided or shut down. Even their silence changes meaning. Earlier silence might have meant distance or withdrawal, but later, silence can become comfortable presence, something shared rather than something separating. In the end, avoidant love is not about absence of feeling. It is about a different way of protecting it. What looks like distance on the surface is often a long history of learning how to stay safe in connection. But when emotional safety is finally experienced slowly and consistently, something quiet but powerful begins to change. They stop seeing closeness as something that takes them away from themselves and start seeing it as something they can exist within without losing control. Their walls do not collapse in a dramatic moment. They soften over time through trust, patience, and emotional steadiness. What begins as hesitation turns into presence. What begins as withdrawal turns into participation. And what begins as fear gradually turns into a quieter form of trust. They may never express love in the loud or traditional way people expect, but their commitment shows in something more stable, staying, showing up, and choosing connection even when it feels uncomfortable. Their love becomes real, not because it is intense, but because it is consistent. Not because it is loud, but because it is reliable. And when an avoidant reaches the point where they choose connection over escape, it is not just attachment anymore, it is emotional growth. That is where their love becomes something lasting. If this message resonated with you, make sure you like the video, subscribe to Trim Authority, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an insight like this. And in the comments, drop the word stillness. If you understand that real love is not always loud, it's often the quiet that stays.